Hi everyone, this is Brant. I'm back recording our Recitation 15. Um, Recitation 15 is on how we work with our SQL databases using Fuel. And today we're going to be doing that same DB app or that same to-do app that we were doing before when we were doing a model view controller thing a while back, where we could add to-dos and stuff like that. I think you guys should remember that pretty well. And so today we're going to be taking that app, and instead of using a file as the backend like we were doing before, we're now going to be using a database. So how we're going to get this to work is, first things first, I'm going to connect to Pulse Secure. So in one of my videos that I posted on Piazza, I showed you all how to set this up. This is the VPN for CSU, and this will allow us to do our local HTML and stuff from home. And then for those Windows users, you can also install this as well. It's very simple. You have to install the Duo app so that you can verify your identity. You have to use two-factor authentication. So all that's covered in a video that I posted on Piazza. And then additionally, for those of you who still have never seen this, this is the InfoSpaces page. You can watch one of my videos on here about installing a web server on your Windows machine. But also, if you want to learn how to use SSH or set up SSH on your Windows machine, which you will need to do, especially for this lab, you can pause the video now and go to InfoSpaces and search SSH, and then you'll see a whole suite of SSH tools and how to install them. And this is a very useful resource. The reason we have to use SSH is it's the only way that we can get access to our database. So if you're on Windows, please do that. If you're a Linux user, you should already know how to use SSH. You have a terminal, and it's very similar to Mac. So what we will do is, sorry, I have the files up from posting this, so let me close out of this. Is let's go ahead and kind of go through this lab. So first things first is, in order to get Fuel to be able to talk to our database, or even before we do that, let's do a quick review. So I'm going to open up my terminal. I'm going to SSH into the lab. Lab hop is just a command that I've created on my personal machine, so I don't have to type the whole thing out. Now let's go here and clear the screen. Now, to connect to our database, we use the command MySQL user, and then my username is BrantR. And then the database I want to access is called CT310. The reason I'm using the CT310 database is because I'm trying to make it so the next TA doesn't have to set up everything on his own profile. He can instead just set it up or use the CT310 database. So, okay, CT310 database. And then H for host, it's hosted on FAR, and then P because I'm going to use a password, and then now I'm in my database. So here I'm going to do show tables. So let's go ahead and do the long forsaken command, drop tables. So before I drop this table, I want to show you what this application looks like. So when you set everything up, basically for this lab, you're going to have to install and download some files just like we've done before. I'm not going to show you how to do that since we've done that about 5 times now. Basically, when you click this, it'll download a tar file, and then in this tar file you have your controller, your model, and your views. So you're just going to copy this into your controllers directory, this into your models directory, and this one goes into your views directory. And then that should basically be the basic setup. And then when you do that, if you go to your CS-Colostate-edu 444, your username, CT310 index, and then the very last thing is the name of the controller, right? So this controller is called to-do DB. So to-do DB is where I'm going. So when I go here, you can see here's what the application looks like. Now this is a non-working version, so there's also a working example linked through the lab where you'll be able to create some to-dos, and you'll be able to cross them off. So This one you can see all the buttons click, but I guess mine works too, so it could possibly be because these are linked to the same database for me, so that's probably why. So I will link it to a different database when we're doing that. But so this one you can see does not work, and so what we will be doing today is you'll get this skeleton, and then we will walk through developing the app so that it works with the database and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this table so we can. No, actually I'm not, because I'm going to do it on a different database. But anyways, so here's the CT310 database. So I'm just doing a quick MySQL review. So let's go ahead and instead, if you need to switch databases, I have one for myself too. So now I'm using my Brant R database. You can see I have a couple tables in here from when we last did this, but there is no to-do table in this database. So I'll be going through and setting this up with you and kind of walking you through the lab. Sorry if it was a little discombobulated of an intro. There's a lot of content here, and I don't know what the best way to go over it is, so I'm just going to kind of iterate through these steps so that we can get everything working and good to go. So basically, first things first is before you even do any file downloading or anything, let's go ahead and show you how to set up Fuel so that it works with your database. So what we will do is if you have CyberDuck, or if you're using SCP, or if you're mounting, I'm not sure how you're doing your work remote, but get onto your lab machine. I'm going to use CyberDuck and go into Fuel, go to App, and go to Config. So we're under Fuel App Config. Now we're going to go into the development config, and we have this file called db.php. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. And this file looks kind of like this. So now I've already written out my configurations, but basically it kind of like, if you were to, there's several of these. There's a production, there's a staging, depending on the environment phase your thing is in. But see how, here's what the default one looks like. So has a MySQL host, database name, username, and password. So what you want to do is go on your thing and set your host, so far.cs.callstate.edu, the name of the database. So I'm going to be using Brant R as my database, the username Brant R, and then I created a password, a very insecure password for the database, since I knew you would all be able to see my password when doing this video. So yes, you can probably hack into my database and destroy all my tables. Please do not do that. I will be changing the password before I release this video, but for the purpose of this video, the password is Brant123. Okay, so what you want to do is go into your file. Let's say, I'm just going to use this raw one just as an example. So you would go in here, you would change your host to far.cs.callstate.edu. You would change the database name to your EID. So mine is Brant R. Username is also your EID. Password is, if you have not used MySQL before, so if you did not watch the last lab, your default password will be your CSU ID number. So mine is 830-309-320, just like when you first log into the lab machines. So if you want to learn how to set a new password, please watch the previous video that I posted for last week's lab, where we go over MySQL and the basics of the database and how to operate it and stuff. But basically, this file, when Fuel loads up, it's going to read this configuration info, and it's going to read this information, and then it's going to connect to the database. So make sure that all this stuff is correct so that your database will work properly. Okay, so let's exit out of this, exit out of that. So then next thing's next. You'll download the tar file. It set up all those files. Let's go for step one though. Okay, so first things first, so we did this configuration file, right? So it's a link to our database. Now you're going to get onto your terminal, or if you're a Windows user, you're going to be using PuTTY. SSH into the lab. connect to MySQL like we did before, and I'm using that same password right here. And obviously I will change it so you guys don't have access to the CT310 database, but now we're in our database. So now first thing is, hold on a second. This -d is whatever database you want to use, so I'm going to be using Brant R. So now you can see the database you're using is shown right here. So then if you want to see the tables in your database, you can do show tables. And what we need to do is this to-do application, we need to create a database table that's very specific. So I kind of gave you the command right here, but I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this and see how it works out. So we're doing create table. The name of the table is to-dos. The first column is going to be named ID, and it's going to be an integer. Second column is going to be named description, and it's a varchar, so a variable length string of 256. And then there's a third variable called completed, and that's a boolean. And then we're going to set this table's primary key to ID. Now this is stuff that we talked about in the database lecture, but we're just applying it right here for application. So now we've created this table, so if we do show tables again, there's our to-dos table, and we can do describe to-dos to see what this table looks like. So it has an ID, it has a description and completed, and then the ID is our primary key and it cannot be null. Okay, so we've set up our database table, and we've configured Fuel to connect to our database. So now we can actually start working on our app. So download the files, place them in the correct locations like I was telling you. I already have them downloaded, so I'm just going to go ahead and go into my Fuel, so Brant Fuel /app, and the first thing we're going to look at is this views. So go into views, go to to-do DB views, and look at to-do main content. So let me open that up. And you can see a file that looks like this. So we have this, let's see, to-do app at the top. Let's add some things. All right. So we've got to-do app, and then for each to-do in our set of to-dos, this is some data that's being passed to the view. We are going to get the text as text, get the ID as ID, so creating some variables, and then we're creating an input of type checkbox with the value of that ID, and then the name to-do check with brackets, and then we're doing a small space, and then we're creating a label that is the description of that to-do. Okay. So please note that if you look at this, this is super important. So the name of this checkbox is to-do check with brackets. Now, what's going to end up happening is we're going to have multiple of these checkboxes, right? So we have, if we look at this form, we have to-do check, to-do check, to-do check, and if we were to create another one of these, we would now see another checkbox, right? So these have these brackets because they're essentially a list of items, right? And so later on, what will happen is, like, let's say we were to click these, when we post this, when it gets sent to PHP, it'll like load these into an array, and then you'll be able to check them based on that array. So it's pretty useful. Okay. So it'll make more sense when we look into the controller how this works, but just know that in order to do this, you need to add those square brackets. Then we have an input type submit. Value is cross off to do, so this button right here. And then really important, the name of this input submit button is delete. And so what we're trying to do is differentiate between adding and deleting. So the idea is that when you click, like if you do this and you click delete, it doesn't submit a new to-do. And then vice versa, if you click these and click add, it doesn't cross them off. It does kind of mess up because it doesn't check for a blank to do, but we're going to fix that. So yeah, that's basically the view. So now let's look at the controller. So all these instructions are also written out, but I like to just kind of flow when I'm doing the video so that I can explain things dynamically. So we'll go from views, we'll go to classes, controller, and we'll look at to-do DB. Okay, now here is our controller, and you don't have to touch any of this code to make the things work. I only modified or skeletonized the model side, but I want to show you the controller so you understand how this application works. So our action index is very similar to when we did this before, right? We get the data. So we get the to-dos by calling the read to-dos method, and we get the to-do count by calling the to-do count method. Now, we forge the view and pass it that data so that it can generate that list of boxes. And then here, if you look at the add or post index, first thing is we check is set post add and is set post to do text. So for this add thing, they have to have clicked basically what I was showing you earlier with the view, which now I should have left the view open. Let's open that view. Okay, so we have this button and the name is delete, and we have this button and the name is add. So we're checking that the add button was clicked by looking at the name add. And then we're checking that there is some text in to-do text and it's not empty. Really what we should say is not an empty string or something like that. Okay. I don't even know if you can do string comparison like this in PHP, but we'll find out very quick. So we're checking that they clicked the add button and that there's some text that we want to add to the database. So then we're going to use to-do DB model, add to-do, and then we're just going to pass it that text. Okay, so what this add to-do function is getting is just the description. Then the second if statement checks that they clicked this, or checks that there's some checkboxes in there. So we should also probably do if is set $_post, and this one is delete. So we're checking that they press the delete button and that the to-do checkboxes, there are some checkboxes that have been clicked. Then this is where this whole brackets thing becomes very valuable. So for each thing in this to-do check, so basically everything that has this name to-do check gets stuffed into an array. For each to-do check as ID, so we're getting those IDs, right? So it's kind of weird, but the value of these is this ID number that they're given. So you can see here value 1, 2, 3. So for post as to do check as ID, when we click these like this, what this is doing is sending an array of items with the IDs 1 and 3. So we're going through that array and we're appending them all to our list of checked to-dos. Then we call the model and we pass it an array of all the to-dos that have been checked to tell it to delete them. And then this last snippet is just like it is in the index function. We're getting the new list of to-dos and getting the new count, and then we're forging the new view. And in fact, we don't even really need these statements anymore because we're no longer using that jank method of clicking up and down with the entering a number. Okay, so that is the controller. And you can read this code on your own if I'm going too fast. But I want to explain to you kind of what it's doing before we go into what your actual assignment will be for today. So basically, your assignment is to make this application work, right? So we've talked about the view, we've talked about the controllers, we've talked about setting up the database. So now we're going to finally talk about this model file. So let's go to classes model right here. Oh, this is the old model, sorry. To do DB model. And you'll get skeleton code that looks like this. So what you need to do is update this skeleton code so that your app works. So as it stands now, right, my app doesn't do anything at all. So we need to make it so it does do stuff. So these functions are getting called but the issue is that they're actually not modifying the database, and so nothing's happening. So what I'm going to do is, if you want to work through this on your own, which I really recommend you do, please pause the video now. So if you finished working through it on your own, or if you would like to see how I'm going to do it, then we'll go over that right now. So what we're going to do, first things first, is let's work this add to do function. So remember, this function just gets the description of the to-do as a parameter. So we have to generate our own ID. So what I do is I just use this function to get the largest ID in the database. It's just a database query that says select max ID as ID from our to-dos table. So I get the largest ID. If there is no largest ID, meaning it's null, then that means that the database is empty, and I'll set it to 1. Otherwise, increment it so we get the next largest. So then I'm going to uncomment this code, and what we need to do is we're using DB insert to-dos, and we're inserting a set of items. And here in our set we have an array. The ID, so what we're doing is we're passing it basically the values we're going to put in the table. So ID is going to be our ID, right? Description is just going to be the description that we were given. So we generated this ID, we were given a description, and then whether it's completed or not, we'll just default to false. Now this doesn't really help us right now because our app doesn't have a completed system. It doesn't have a way of marking them as completed but not deleting them. So that's something we will have to deal with at some point, but that's okay. So now we have modified this insert function. Let's see if it works now. So now we can add items to our to-dos, which is really useful. So let's see what's happening here. So first of all, my cross-off doesn't work, right? So let's go and look at our database. So here I am in the database, and I'm going to select star from to-dos. So here are all the things I just, I'll move this over. Here are all the things I was just adding, right? So some other stuff, bananas, groceries, you can see here, item number 4. So when I click this, it's invoking the controller, right? It's checking that I clicked the add button. It's checking that there's some text, and then it's calling the add to do function, which is right here. This calls DB insert, passes all that data in, and then executes the query. And as a result, the database gets updated. So let's do this. So now we've added an item to our database, and now we have this. Okay, so that's pretty sweet. Let's now look at doing the delete function. So here I'm going to uncomment this line. So to do delete, we're going to use db delete. And this is all relatively simple, you can see. So this is where it's really ideal having this fuel framework to do this for us. So we want to delete from our to-dos table where the ID of the to-do is in this list of IDs that were being passed. So this is the equivalent of executing, I'll show you the query in MySQL, but so we're being passed an array of to-do IDs, right, from the controller, like we talked about earlier. We're getting all the checked boxes. We're passing those numbers in, and then we're executing the query. So this is the equivalent of if we were to do delete from to-dos where ID in the list 1, 3, and 4, right? So now I've deleted these items. So if we select star from the table again, we have just bananas. Now if I reload this, you'll see that this change is also reflected here because it's getting its data from this database. So now if we add our items, we have all this stuff. Now we can click these buttons. So first of all, let's do a select star. You can see 2, 3, 4, 5. so there's 5 ID numbers, but that's because it's just getting the next highest, so it's not always consistent because I didn't want to re-ID them every time, if that makes sense. So it doesn't matter that it's increasing. If you delete all of them, it'll go back to 0. And I doubt that someone will ever make like 2 billion to-dos that will break this. So for this example, it's fine. So they click these checkboxes. When they hit cross off to-dos, it invokes the controller. It checks that they clicked the delete button. It checks that there are some to-dos that have been checked. Then for each checked to-do, we add them to our array, and then we call delete to-dos by passing it this array of IDs. And then we call database delete, delete from the to-dos table, where the ID, so ID, it's talking about this column right here, where the ID column matches one of the IDs from this list. So let's go ahead and call this. So when I do this, it's going to delete these two, and then we'll do a select at the database and see how it changed. So let's cross them off. And now they've been deleted, and now let's look at the new table. Now we only have these 2 items, and you can see that the delete works properly. So for this lab, that's all you really need to do. The idea of me giving you all this code is that you can look at it later on when you're building your applications and go, okay, how do we do this basic add, remove, read? And then in order to do update, it would be a little bit more complicated, so I didn't cover it, but you can, in theory, make these inputs or something that they could edit, and then update to-dos, set description equal to hello, where ID equals 3. Let's see if that works. Okay, so update to-dos, set description equal to hello, where ID equals 3. So now you can see that this has changed. So basically, you would just use a query like that. If you look at this query builder set, it has everything you need to know about accessing this database, and that's linked in to the lab. So DB update, value, where, execute. Or if you have a complicated query and you just don't know how to do it, you can also do this query. But please note that this query thing can be kind of sketch because you have to select the type of query you're doing, whether it's a read query or an update query and stuff like that. It gets kind of funky, so it's better to just use the methods that they give you. But you can also do queries like that. So you can see that in the app I did query select max ID as ID from to-dos. This is like a special query, right? And then here I have select ID description as text from to-dos. So because in the view, we believe that the to-do description is text and not description, I had to rename it as it was coming out of the database. But either way, it works perfectly well. So once you're done with this lab, please submit the link to your working to-do app on Canvas under Lab 15, and then that way I'll be able to grade that you all did this lab. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you all are having a fantastic time quarantining and you're not staying too busy. I hope that these labs are still useful for you, and if you have any questions, I'll be on Slack tomorrow at 3, so you can just message me and we can work through it together. All right, thank you so much. I'll talk to you guys later.